Hello, sixth grade. After we do this test, I like to go back and talk about the Articles of Confederation in the Constitution and the Constitutional Convention because it's really important for our country. The Constitution is the form of government we still use today. So one thing I like to do is read this book, part of this book, Founding Fathers, Creators of the United States. So what you all are going to do is, it's a little bit up to you as to how you do it. The way I would like for you to do it is to have two tabs open on your computer. The tab that is showing the YouTube link, and then the tab that is either Google Docs or Word. And then when you hear me read something interesting, pause me, open up the tab where you have either Google Docs or Word, have a bulleted document. So type a bullet of bullet, phrase, something that you thought was really interesting or important that I read. After you type that, go back to me, save, go back to me, listen some more when you come up with something else that you think is interesting. Or if I ask a question, pause and go and answer the question and then go back and forth that way. If you absolutely have to, you could write it, but man, some of your all's handwriting, taking a picture of it, no, I would really prefer you to have the two tabs going. It should actually be pretty easy to do it that way, to have the two tabs going. Just pause me, type, and either answer my question, or if you just think it's something really interesting, put it on there. I'm going to divide it up, so it'll be about 10-15 minutes today, about 10-15 minutes tomorrow. Introduction. Their names and reputations have made history. George Washington, James Madison, John Adams, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. These are some of the men who shaped one of the greatest nations on earth. They are the founding fathers of the U.S. of A. And so it starts by telling us about Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin, one of the most important of the founding fathers, was Benjamin Franklin. He was a statesman, diplomat, writer, scientist, and inventor, and one of the most talented men of his time. A leading figure in the struggle for independence from Great Britain, Franklin helped draft the Declaration of Independence and was one of its signers in 1776. He represented the U.S. and France during the American Revolutionary War, which, as we know, if it wasn't for France coming over to help us, I'm not sure we would have won the Revolutionary War. So the fact that he was over there getting help from the French was hugely important. He signed the Treaty of Paris that ended the Revolutionary War, and was a delegate to the Constitutional Convention, which created the Constitution of the U.S., a document that Franklin also signed. At the age of 81, Franklin was the convention's oldest delegate and has been hailed as the first American. A quote that is attributed to him is either write something worth reading or do something worth writing. William Pierce said about him, he is a most extraordinary man. Birth of a nation. Here you see a map of the 13 colonies. Here you see a picture of the Constitutional Convention with some of the famous dudes, a well-known picture from that time period. Birth of a nation. There are some dates in history that have changed the world. You know, I'm the history teacher, but I'm still not a huge date person. I think it's more important that you get kind of the big picture, but there are some dates that you need to know. One of them is July the 4th, 1776. On that date, the U.S. declared its independence from Great Britain. It was a giant step toward becoming an independent nation. However, Britain was not going to let its North American colonies go without a fight. So, the question is, first question I'm going to ask you is what happened on July 4th, 1776? So, go to your other document and write what happened on July 4th, 1776. And then come back to me. The draft Declaration of Independence is presented to Congress, presenting the document from left to right. So we're back to the picture here. So this is the Declaration of Independence being presented. Is John Adams, Roger Sherman, Roger Livingston, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. Because Benjamin Franklin is the one that gets the credit for writing the Declaration of Independence. He would have had some other dudes helping him. By the mid-1700s, about 2 million people lived in Great Britain's North American colonies. There were 13 colonies stretched along the eastern seaboard of North America, south of present-day Canada. The colonies were ruled by Britain from Britain, and for many people in the colonies, that was a problem. To them, they were Americans, and England was a foreign country, far away that had no right to interfere in their affairs. The colonies grew restless and rebelled in Massachusetts. As a result, the British government sent its army to restore British control. Revolutionary War. On April 19, 1775, British troops were stopped by armed American patriots near Concord, Massachusetts. The British ordered the Americans to lay down their arms, but they refused. It's not clear who fired the first shot, but it's known as the shot heard around the world. Declaration of Independence. As the war entered its second year, American politicians began talking about freedom from England. Because remember, originally it wasn't clear whether we were fighting to just be treated nicely, to be treated equally with other English people, or if we were fighting to be independent from them. We were fighting to be independent from them. By this point, it was clear we wanted to be free from them. Both sides had victories and setbacks during the Revolutionary War, but by the autumn of 1781, British forces were besieged at Yorktown, Virginia. The war ended on October 19, 1781, when British troops surrendered to General George Washington. 2 years later, on September the 3rd, 1783, a peace document known as the Treaty of Paris was signed, and the war was over. 13 colonies had gained their freedom. And you can see a picture here of an early version of the flag. An early version of the U.S. flag with 7 red and 6 white stripes and 13 stars in a blue field. The 13 stars, of course, represent the original 13 states. Continental Congress. Before the first shot was fired in the American Revolutionary War, a different kind of war was raging between Great Britain and her colonies. It was a war of words between politicians from both sides. The word war united the 13 American colonies against Britain, and from it emerged strong leaders and the first signs of a national or federal government. In 1776, many everyday goods in America began to cost more because the British government added a tax onto them. Americans protested and people stopped buying British goods. In 1770, Britain scrapped taxes on all goods except tea. The tea tax was unpopular, and in 1773, chests of British tea were thrown into the Boston Harbor, Massachusetts, by American protesters. Of course, it was called the Tea Party. And then later, the Intolerable Acts were passed to punish Boston for the Boston Tea Party. For many Americans, Great Britain had gone too far. It was bad enough to be paying taxes to Britain, but the presence of thousands of British soldiers only made matters worse. American newspapers and pamphlets called for independence from Britain. In September 1774, delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies came together for the First Continental Congress, held in Philadelphia. Strong leaders emerged. The Continental Congress met at different towns throughout the 6 years of fighting. Powerful leaders emerged. Get some of these guys listed. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Patrick Henry, and if you can, remember, put out from Patrick Henry what his famous quote is, James Madison and John Adams. These are your founding fathers. So make a list of at least some of the founding fathers. You don't have to get all of them listed necessarily. And beside Patrick Henry, put what he's famous for, his famous quote. The colonies' demands. After 7 weeks of talk, the First Continental Congress ended, and the colonies made their demands to Britain. The colonies wanted British troops to pull out of Boston, and the Intolerable Acts or the Coercive Acts to end. The colonies wanted until that happened, the colonies refused to trade with England. They made a plan to meet again in 8 months if the British didn't meet their demands. Britain refused the colonies' demands and sent troops to end what was seen as a rebellion in Massachusetts. The Second Continental Congress went ahead as planned in Philadelphia in May 1775. All 13 colonies were represented, and this time there was a war to discuss because the first shots in the American Revolution had been fired. Right away, Congress agreed that the colonies be immediately put into a state of defense. Plans were made to raise a continental army of 20,000 men with George Washington as its commander. George Washington, war hero. So now we're going to learn a little about George Washington. So you need to have some facts about George Washington as I read them. As early as 1778, George Washington was described as the father of his country. The American Revolutionary War was still being fought, and it was to be another 5 years before the U.S. could call itself an independent nation. George Washington was born in 1732 on his parents' tobacco plantation in Virginia. He studied English, math, and geography at school, but as the son of a farmer, his real education did not come from books. Instead, the young Washington learned how to be a tobacco farmer, like his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather before him. Washington's oldest brother, Lawrence, was in charge of the family tobacco plantation at Mount Vernon, Virginia. When Lawrence died in 1752, Mount Vernon was passed on to George. Aged just 20, he was now head of one of Virginia's wealthiest estates. For the next 20 years, Washington farmed his Mount Vernon estate. He enlarged the main house, increased the size of the estate to 8,000 acres, and bought slaves to work the land. Starting in 1754, Great Britain and France fought each other over control of North America, where both nations had colonies in what became known as the French and Indian War. Washington fought for the British. His military career had begun, and in 1755, aged 23, he was made commander of Britain's colonial troops in Virginia. His life was nearly cut short when 4 enemy bullets ripped through his coat and 2 horses were shot out from under him. Fighting ended in 1760 when England won. He returned back to be a farmer at Mount Vernon. The peace that followed the French and Indian War was short-lived. To pay for the war, Great Britain increased the taxes paid by our American colonies. Colonies protested, and the war began. That May, all 13 colonies sent representatives to the Second Continental Congress. The state of Virginia sent George Washington. Having shown his skills as a general in the French and Indian War, he was elected commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. He took charge of an ill-trained army that lacked leadership, but under his command, he turned it into a disciplined fighting force. The armed struggle against Britain lasted 6 grueling years. Finally, in 1781, Washington forced British General Cornwallis to surrender at Yorktown. 2 years later, the British finally left American soil. The war had ended in victory for the colonies, and Washington became a national hero. In December, he announced that his army life was over, his job was finished. He was going to go back to Mount Vernon and his other life as a farmer. But that didn't quite work. Articles of Confederation. A significant act of the Continental Congress during the Revolutionary War. You got to keep in mind, we didn't win the war and then be like, oh, we should have a government. No, we came up with a plan for government during the war. We were smart enough to know, okay, if we win this, we got to have a government already in place. The Articles of Confederation had some issues, but at least it was there. It was in place. This was the first attempt at writing a constitution. The Articles of Confederation, which were drafted in June 1776. Remember, Declaration of Independence was signed July the 4th, 1776. So they were starting the Articles of Confederation even before the Declaration of Independence was signed. That should be in your notes. He was known as the penman of the Revolution, John Dickinson was, because of the many official documents he had already written for the Continental Congress. He was also one of the best legal minds in the colonies. Dickinson wanted the 13 colonies to join together to form a firm league of friendship or a confederation. Articles granted important powers to the Continental Congress. They could send ambassadors to foreign countries. They could issue money. They could borrow money. They could set up a postal system. They could declare war. They could make treaties. They could control the affairs of the Native Americans. They could keep an army and a navy. They could call on the colonies to provide troops and money in time of war. They could set standards for weights and measures and settle boundary disputes between colonies. The Articles of Confederation were supposed to create one government for all the colonies. However, that raised a problem. At the time the Articles were drafted, the colonies were fighting for their independence from an all-controlling government. Would a national government be any better, or would it upset the colonies by interfering in their internal affairs? Because there was distrust of national authority, the Articles of Confederation got off to a bad start, and it was not until 1781 that all 13 colonies agreed to adopt them. And you see here this political ad, join or die. A famous, I can't read upside down and try to hold this in front of the camera. This is not going well for me, guys. Sorry. There it is. You can see it. A famous political cartoon created by Benjamin Franklin. It shows a snake cut into pieces, the pieces representing the different colonies. The message to the colonies was clear. Join together to act as one body or die. Continental dollars. During the American Revolutionary War, the Continental Congress issued paper money known as continental currency. Each colony issued its own money in dollars, which were used to pay the troops of the Continental Army and buy goods. In total, Congress issued a bunch of money, $241 million. However, because Congress didn't have the same value held in gold or silver to back up the paper money, the new currency quickly lost its value. To make matters worse, the British government put fake dollar bills into circulation. So England's trying to mess with our money system. By May 1781, continental dollars had become so worthless that they ceased to circulate as money. Any worthless object was described as not worth a continental. So it's pretty sad that the money was thought to be absolutely worthless. All right, we'll pick up tomorrow with the Constitutional Convention. So here is what I want you to do. Save your notes, and then tomorrow you'll just add to your notes, and then you'll add to them again on Friday when we finish the book. It probably will take us 3 days. And then on Friday is when you'll attach your notes for all 3 days. So you're not attaching just part of your notes. So you'll just turn them all in together on Friday. Today you'll do simple solutions, check simple solutions, take your open book simple solutions quiz. Remember, the quiz is attached to the assignment part of LMS. The LMS quiz is the answer sheet. I cannot retype simple solutions quizzes. It's too hard. So that's today. I'll see you tomorrow.